Good morning. Before we get started, I just want to check and see if everyone can hear me okay. So if you could please let me know through the question box if there are any issues with volume and understanding what I'm saying. Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you all so much for attending this webinar this morning. I hope everyone is staying safe. Hope everyone is staying warm, just as importantly as the polar vortex heads to the country. So thank you all again for taking time this morning. My name is Nathan Schulman. I am a program coordinator for the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. Today, we're going to be talking about safety planning, specifically safety planning for survivors of domestic violence. We know that safety planning is an invaluable exercise, for helping survivors of domestic violence, regardless of where they are in their journey to a peaceful life. And just like the rest of life, people need help at different times in different ways. For some, determining how to leave safely might be the majority of the planning needed or requested. For others, leaving is easy. It's strategies for staying out of the relationship, that makes up the majority of the safety planning. That's what they want to focus on. How do I avoid going back into it? How do I keep, someone that might not feel safe from finding me again or keeping them away? So how do we know what the survivor needs then? It's simple. We ask. As advocates, a fundamental fact to remember is that the safety plan originates from the survivor. Odds are, in fact, they're already following a safety plan of some kind before you even talk with them. They might not consciously think of it as a safety plan or follow it, consistently 100% every time. But survivors, and I'm going to be repeating this over and over again as we go through the training, they're the experts of their own situation. And we'd be fools not to rely upon that expertise. Our goal then is to help them summarize and affirm what they're already doing for themselves, and then fill in those gaps with our professional perspective, knowledge, and resources. So today, first and foremost, we're going to be talking about how to talk with survivors. How to get in a conversation with someone that's in a very difficult situation where stress is high, where odds are they have experienced or currently experiencing traumatic events. And how to know how to talk with them so that they feel comfortable, that they feel held, they feel heard, and their stories being held, and as well that you're feeling comfortable, that you feel safe in giving out information, because ultimately, if you are not comfortable with the advice and the guidance you're providing, they're going to pick up on that, and that's going to affect it. So we're going to talk about all the fundamentals of talking with survivors, which will, then neatly segue into some trauma-informed interviewing tips. And lastly, we're going to talk about safety planning details. You'll see as we get into it, I'm not going to be going step by step through every single possible safety plan step you could think of. Because as I said, it is so personalized, and everyone's situation is a little bit different. So we're going to be talking more broadly today, which should then allow you help in figuring out the specifics in the moment with that survivor. I will do the best I can to keep an eye on any questions you might have as we go through it. I'm happy to stop anything, to have a conversation, to answer questions in the moment. If I miss your question, I apologize in advance. There should certainly be time at the end of the webinar, though, for questions. So if for some reason I missed it during it, please don't be discouraged. Please reiterate at the end. I don't want any questions left unanswered as we go through this. So talking with survivors. Obviously, the first and foremost, what you need to do is assess the severity of the crisis, when they reach out. Because you need to know if you're the right person to be handling it in the moment. Again, remembering survivors are the experts of their situation. So if you're not familiar with the hotline, it's common to assume that every single crisis call is that real stark, scary vision that someone might imagine a crisis call to be, where someone is in a locked bathroom, they're screaming, they're shouting, there's chaos, and they need immediate assistance. Not to say that those calls can't come, but again, survivors being experts of their situation, you want to rely on the fact that they are likely going to call you when it's safe for them to call. They know the right window of opportunity to reach out, and they're going to know if they're reaching out, it's because they're at a place where they can reach out. That being said, if someone is very rushed in wanting to get answers, information, if they seem very nervous on the phone, it's certainly okay to pause and go, is this a safe time to talk? You know, are we the right people to be talking with in this moment? We can't help in the moment, you know, normally as advocates. You know, that's where law enforcement really does play a role. You know, however a survivor might think of law enforcement. You know, we can't tear off in the night, you know, and break up a fight in the moment if that's what's happening in the moment. You know, we are the resource for after that fight. We're the resource, you know, to hopefully prevent that fight from happening in the first place. And that way, you know, everyone's going to be taken care of better that way. The survivor is getting what they truly need in the moment, and you as an advocate, you aren't placing unfair pressure on yourself for what you're able to realistically accomplish. So you want to first assess that, and, you know, and if they're able to talk, they want to talk. And from there, you have to figure out how to talk with them. Now, all my suggestions today, in terms of how to talk with a survivor, you can take with an initial grain of salt, just because, you know, how words come, you know, words can sound perfectly natural to me coming out of my mouth. They can feel good to you, but those words might not be the right words for you. So with a lot of this, it's about the idea behind it rather than the exact delivery. You know, as long as you are, you know, being caring, considerate, trying to help sincerely, and are doing the best you can to convey that with your tone and your actions, you don't have to follow a particular script. In fact, you know, a particular script probably isn't the right way to go unless it is your script that you wrote out, because again, the survivor is going to pick up on if you sound stilted or unsure of yourself. So you want to make sure that you're using the language that sounds right coming out of your mouth, that feels right for you to work with. That being said, I will always vouch for empathetic curiosity as, you know, as the right tone to seek out, you know, when you're finding that trauma-informed style. You know, it keeps things nimble, it keeps things light, keeps you on your feet. You know, you care because you're curious, and you're curious because you care. So that way, as you're working with someone, you know, if you stumble across a particular question that might be especially difficult for the survivor to hear or talk about, you might even, you know, hit a trigger point and you know, bring up some anger. You know, it's easy to bounce back from that if you are having something more akin to a conversation rather than, you know, giving off the impression that you were dryly going down a checklist and answering questions just because, you know, that's your job and it's information to gather. So again, that empathetic curiosity keeps things more conversational, allows you to backtrack, it allows you, you know, to work around any obstacles you might have. That being said, if a survivor doesn't want to talk about something, respect that. You know, definitely, you know, it's important that they are laying down the boundaries that they are comfortable with, and it's even more important that you're paying attention to those boundaries, because as we know in domestic violence, that's often the largest problem, is that boundaries are not being respected. You're going to want to match their language. So you don't want to necessarily want to use the word survivor, victim, batterer, abuser, you know, any of those words that we use so commonly in this field until they're using them first. And that's I believe in that for a couple of reasons. One, even if they are self-identifying in their heads as a survivor or a victim, you know, if they think of their husband as an abuser, you know, until they start using that with you, you don't know for a fact that they're comfortable hearing it from someone else. You know, it might be something they're just coming to terms with, and they're just not at a place where they can hear a stranger, you know, likely over a phone or maybe in person, use those words back. So you want to make sure that you are using the language that they have accepted, that they have internalized, that they're giving you permission to use. As well, you know, again, going back to assessing the severity of the crisis, you don't know where they're at in their relationship. Maybe someone is reaching out to the hotline because they had one fight with their partner that was a little scary, and they just want to reach out and get some information, you know, just to be aware of warning signs for the future, which is certainly great. We want everyone aware, and certainly the goal is to you know, not fall into an abusive relationship in the first place. So that's great, you know, but if that person calls the hotline and just begins with, I want to talk about, you know, something that happened with my boyfriend, and you immediately, maybe instinctually, you know, reply with the first question of how long have you been with your batterer for, well, that could be a lot for them to hear. And, you know, and they could understandably take offense to that. It will probably likely shut down the conversation, or at least make it awkward. and then, they're not getting that information that they're reaching out to get. And furthermore, they might not be comfortable reaching out down the line if things do, unfortunately, get worse, because they might remember that hotline experience as, one that didn't feel comfortable to them, one where, where they're at wasn't necessarily being respected. You also want to match language just for cultural competency's sake, and being sensitive that everyone has different backgrounds. We want to make, it's common in the domestic violence field to use, those heteronormative terms, where it's more often than not the abuser, the abuser is a male and the victim or survivor is female. So putting aside for a fact that it can be reversed, and certainly, the woman can be the abuser and the male can be the survivor, automatically falling to the language discounts, same-sex relationships. And depending on where you are in the country, what your community looks like, there can be a lot of concern about revealing that you're in a safe-sex relationship. And that absolutely applies just as much to a hotline, however confidential it is, especially if they're potentially reaching out for help, where trust is such an important matter. So if someone calls a hotline and says, I'm having trouble with an abusive relationship, when you immediately respond back, how long have you been with, him for, assuming that it was a female caller, you are, sending the message to this person that, in your mind, a relationship is between a man and a woman. And regardless of whether or not that's your actual view, hopefully it isn't, they're going to pick up on that, and they're really going to read that as something. And they might not, understandably, they might draw from that, okay, this hotline, these people are focused on heteronormative relationships. They're not interested in same-sex relationships. They're not the right person for me. So you could possibly lose the opportunity to help someone before you even get started, just because you're not being, super sensitive to, your pronoun game and making assumptions before it's actually shared. You also don't want to take any anger or bad mood or what have you, personally. It's not their job to be pleasant. It's not their job to be in a good mood. It's not their job to make you feel comfortable. The survivor's job is to get the help that they're reaching out to get, and you're supposed to make that as easy as possible for them. And it's not as much a two-way street. You are enacting basically customer service, so it's your job to be pleasant no matter what. Their job is to get out of their situation. So, don't take it personally, because odds are, especially if you've just started working with someone, there's no way it can be about you. It's about their anger is at their situation. Their anger is at possibly their abuser. Their anger is at the lack of resources. You were just a convenient scapegoat, for that anger. Especially if it's over the hotline, you're a safe scapegoat. That person can yell at you, and they know the worst you can do is hang up. And if you have a lot of anger and no obvious outlet, that can be really important. Now, there's of course that line where you have to decide, is this person just upset and I'm working with them, or are they being abusive? Am I being attacked? How do I feel? How do I feel as an advocate? Do I feel emotionally safe? Certainly, if you're working in person, do I feel physically safe? And everyone has their, that line. I know advocates that will really stick with it and, and are okay getting yelled at if they see the light in the tunnel of going, okay, but we have this safety plan. And others are more sensitive to it. That is your call and your call to make. You do not deserve to be abused any more than the person that you're helping. So if you feel that the conversation is not going anywhere, if you feel like all of your suggestions are not being met with anything but resistance and anger, if it doesn't feel safe, it's always okay to, simply politely explain, we want to help you. We can't do this if you're this upset with me. You're gonna have to get off the phone. We're gonna have to end this meeting. You're welcome to come back, when we are available. If it's a hotline, hopefully always available, but, when you've calmed down. And that's okay. You're not denying them services. You're just acknowledging and that you can't give them what, you're trying to offer them if they're responding this way. And you're certainly leaving the door open for them to come back. And once you make that boundary known, just follow through on it. If someone's yelling at you and is just upset and is just emotional and isn't really thinking about the contents of the conversation anymore, they're probably not going to stop and go, oh, of course I'll stop yelling at you. You're welcome to hang up now. So do what you can to convey politely, professionally that this needs to end if you feel it needs to end, but then get out of there. And hopefully, they'll take time to calm down, and they will reach back out and the conversation can continue. Say it again, survivors are the expert of their situation. And I have that here particularly just because as you're working with survivors, it's not uncommon to hear the question of, what should I do? And depending on how, all-encompassing that question is, you might have an answer, you might not. If they are asking, what should I do in terms to which resource to reach out to? Well, absolutely, you can probably, put forth some of your own opinions, some of your suggestions. If it's just a general, I'm in this situation and it doesn't feel safe, what should I do? Well, you got to at least back it up a little bit and give them some, some agency in this, even if they don't want it. For the reasons we've already kind of talked about. One, it gives them agency, it gives them autonomy. It's part of the process of leaving a domestic violence relationship is finding that empowerment. So it's empowering to figure out your own plan. Plus, again, they know it better than you. They know their life better than you. They know their abuser better than you. So it's not just to empower them. It's to have a quality, safety plan that's going to work. It needs to be on them. And that can be difficult, and you might need to process a little bit, that a little bit, and kind of explain the reasons why they need to be more involved, because you don't want them to think that you're just, denying them, help just because you can. You're not denying them help. You're just explaining that the help needs to be a joint process. You need to work with them. Trauma and memory. So you can't be a good detective. And actually, I skipped over that. Let's go back to that for a second. Detective work. Apologies, guys. A lot of at least an initial conversation with a survivor when they're figuring out a safety plan is that detective work. You're trying to get enough information about their situation so you can realistically provide a safety plan. Some people, they'll call the hotline or reach out to an advocate, and they know exactly what they want, and they will, without even prompting, give you all the information they can think of to help figure out, the safety plan. That's great. Work with it. Listen to them. Don't interrupt them. Take it all down, because if they're sharing something, it's because they want to share it. Sometimes people call and know exactly what resource they want, but they have no idea beyond that. They go, I want shelter, help. And that's great. You have an endpoint to work towards, and it's a matter of getting the details to figure out how to get there. And sometimes a survivor might call and have no idea what to talk about, what even to say. All of their effort, all of their courage was just picking up that phone and calling. And we cannot stress enough what a big step it is for a survivor to reach out in the first place. They're breaking that initial silence, they're breaking that initial isolation. It is huge, and we really want to respect that just calling, just reaching out is a phenomenal, fundamental step, and one of the hardest steps. So that's okay if they haven't thought past what happens when someone picks up the phone. We want to honor that they got that far, and then we try to help them along the way. So again, everyone has their own language, their own phrasing, what works best for them. I personally have found this phrase to be really useful if a survivor does not know at all where to go with the conversation, and it's simply, if you're comfortable sharing a little bit what's going on, I'm happy to connect you up with resources and support. So that way, you're giving them a reason to share information, which we know can be difficult, and trust can be difficult. We're giving them a reason. And if you're willing to share this, I am willing to give you resources and support. So they know before they even get into it what they're going to be getting back. And at the same time, you are not over-promising or what you can deliver. You don't want to say, if you share what's going on, I'll give you shelter, when you don't even know if this person's going to qualify for shelter. They might be in a crisis where shelter is not even the best fit. Or, they might be an absolute fit for shelter, but maybe no shelters are available. So you don't want to start off by, accidentally betraying trust by making over-promising. So you don't want to say, tell me what's going on, I'll get you in a shelter. It's, you want to keep it a little broader until you find out more what's going on. So the detective work. And then you can't be a good detective if you don't understand the relationship between trauma and the brain, and in particular, how trauma can impair memory encoding and the ability to describe details of an event. This is because during a traumatic event, your body is pumping out cortisol, which is a steroid hormone that interferes directly with the hippocampus, the part of that brain that logs and organizes memories. So the things that are more likely to be remembered during trauma are, the details most important to survival, the threat of harm, often called the weapon focus, so you're focusing in on that gun, you're focusing in on the scratch on the side of that gun, but you might not necessarily know whether or not the person holding the gun has a beard or not. You're just focused in on the immediate threat. And lastly, the emotions that the experience conveys. So this trauma can put these, the snapshots of memory out of linear chronological order. So recalling them can be really difficult, and understandably frustrating for the survivor, and frustrating for the advocate if we're not aware of what's happening here, which is that it's a chemical matter that is outside of the survivor's control. So the example I like to give here, and I know everyone's memory is a little bit different. I know some people's memory, they're going to say my memory is horrible in the best of circumstances. But generally speaking, when you think about how your mind collects and stores memories, and let's say in a non-traumatic event, think of the hippocampus as a container full of neatly written out note cards, and accessing that memory is a matter of your brain going to the right room, picking up that container of note cards, flipping through to the right memory, picking it up and saying, okay, that's what happened that day. Pretty straightforward, right where everything is. There's not a lot of hunting. It's all clearly laid out. With a traumatic event, you throw away the container. There's no container to hold the note cards, and they're not even note cards. Let's say it's just 10, post-it notes with stuff scribbled on it. And those 10 post-it notes are scattered all around, not even the room, the house. So you don't know what room it's in, you don't know if it's under something, you don't know if it's hiding, you don't know if it's visible. So for a survivor, piecing together what happened during a traumatic experience, it can be that time consuming and that frustrating. They not only have to find the memories, but they have to try to put them in the right order. They have to understand what the memory means to them. And it's a real process. And it's okay as advocates to stress to them, that it is a process, and that's where patience and empathy really comes into play. Sorry, I'm just going to check right now on a question someone had. We talked about approaching clients to reach out specifically for shelter, but are already frustrated because I've had to tell their story at several other shelters at capacity. Yes, that is absolutely a common frustration. And unfortunately, when it comes down to a lack of resources, there is only so much we can do. Because resources are either available or not. Though my suggestion, at least right off, it's a great question. And as always with this work, if there were perfect answers to these questions, everything would be a lot easier. But I would say if someone's calling, let's say they're calling your shelter, you are at capacity, and they're like, another shelter, I don't want another shelter, let's assume that you have some other shelters to offer them, and their response is, I don't want to call another place. I've been calling, I'm calling, this is worthless. Well, we know that until, unless they keep going, they're going to be stuck. So we want to encourage them to keep going. We just want to figure out how to make it easier for them. So what I would suggest in that moment is, assuming hopefully there's some other programs you could possibly look at, offer to be a part of that process, assuming that you have the time. Offer to call with them. That warm handoff can be really important. If they are comfortable with it, you can even offer at the very beginning, when they call with the person, to explain to the advocate, I'm calling with so-and-so, I've gotten permission from them to share a little bit of what's going on, and obviously you're not going to be the one to decide whether that shelter let them in. That other shelter advocate's probably going to have to ask questions as well, but you're making it a little bit easier. You're doing what you can in your limited role here, to make their process a little bit easier. So things like that. So situations like that, or if they can't even think about calling another shelter in the moment, safety planning gets shift to, are you safe for the moment, even for the next hour? Is there anything you can do in the next hour just to give yourself that break so you can go back at it again, with more energy, with that, the tenacity necessary. So it is frustrating and it can be difficult. And as with all these things, these suggestions, they might not work. And someone only wants to hear what they can, hear in the moment. So if any of these strategies don't work, hopefully don't assume that it's your fault, because we can only do so much. All we can do is our best. And sometimes, you're not going to give them the answer or the solution they're going to be happy with, no matter how much you try. Good question. So kind of along with just that question, you don't want to unnecessarily re-traumatize. So we understand, with trauma in the brain that, asking a survivor to, recall those memories, especially if they're scattered, especially if they're unclear, can be very hard. In fact, they can be re-traumatizing. Now, as advocates, we often have to, especially if you are kind of the gatekeeper at a shelter or a hotline, we often have to ask those questions that are difficult, that can possibly re-traumatize. We don't love that, but we just need the information. So unfortunately, that's part of the process. We just want to make sure we're not unnecessarily doing it. So if someone is if you already know all the ins and outs and details of someone's, domestic violence situation, you don't have to ask for them to say it again in another way just to kind of keep the flow of the conversation going, just to fill out a different question that might sound somewhat similar to another question they've already answered. You just be mindful of what you're asking and why you're asking, and see what you can do with the information given. Just remember that, if they're sharing stuff with you, it's likely not easy for them. It's likely requiring probably more trust than they're comfortable with. So we just want to make sure that any question we're asking is for a very specific reason. And we want to remember the average, of 6 to 8 times. And that's, someone's going to possibly, leave a relationship 6 to 8 times before leaving for good. And I bring that up not necessarily for you to share with the survivor, you're going to be back again, because we never want to say that. But it's for you as an advocate to remember that this is a process. And you want to make sure that you're not putting unnecessary pressure on you for this safety plan to to be the end all be all to get someone to safety and out of a violent relationship. We know that sometimes a shelter is only the first step of many possible programs before that survivor is in the independent place, in a life that they're happy with. So it's a process. So you just remember that you can only put so much pressure on yourself for results, and some of it is just, unfortunately, it takes as long as it's going to take. And lastly, this isn't your fault is just a really good phrase to both constantly remind survivors of as you're talking with them, as well as just to have in the back of your mind as you're talking about whatever you're talking about. Because if you have in the back of your mind, this isn't your fault, this isn't your fault, this isn't your fault, it's hopefully going to help inform your tone. And make it even more natural to be talking in that empathetic, trauma-informed way that hopefully will make survivors more comfortable to be discussing difficult things. A couple other trauma-informed interviewing do's and don'ts. We want to avoid asking why. In fact, we want to avoid all of those blunt, hard W words. We want to avoid why, who, what, where's, when's, all those. Because the simplicity of the question creates pressure for a neat, simple answer without any follow-up details or qualifiers. And we know that's not possible, likely not possible at least. And furthermore, we live in a society where the neat, simple answers to a matter of abuse is overwhelmingly skewed towards victim blaming. Survivors know this, and if they feel, however, in family that you are not trying to understand their truth, however complicated, creating a sincere safety plan is going to be very difficult. We also want to avoid clinical words like strangulation, which, while familiar to those of us in the domestic violence field, might not, mean or carry the same textbook definitions for survivors. And words like rape or beaten, they can be blunt, overwhelming, and difficult to self-identify with, which is why it's important to approach it, from an inquiry based in feelings rather than a definitive classification. One, that's more gentle, and two, because as we just talked about, the way that trauma affects memory, they often are having to go off of feelings rather than hard facts, concrete memories. So by going into that realm, you're making it far easier for them to, recall and answer your questions. So rather than, asking them to list off all the times that their partner's been violent, you can just ask, tell me about a time that you were really scared that you recall, when you were really afraid, or you really felt like your personal space wasn't being honored or respected. And then lastly, with the police, we always want to be really careful how we ask. It's no secret that that people's feelings on law enforcement are mixed. I mean, you never know until you really talk with someone how they feel about the police. So the police could be a scary thing, in the best of times. So we want to make sure that not everyone immediately thinks to call the police. And even if they're comfortable with the police, we want to make sure that we're not just saying, did you call the police? Because that really is a victim blaming kind of a way of asking about that, right? It's basically implying, why didn't you call the police? You were in danger, you could have called the police, what happened? So phrasing it as, were the police called, is taking that implied pressure off the survivor. Why didn't you act? It's just a matter of fact. It's detective work. It's information gathering. It's just they happen to be there. We also know often police arrive because of nothing the survivor did. Maybe it was a neighbor that heard his service and called. So there's certainly reasons why the police could show up that the survivor had nothing to do with, and maybe they didn't even like that. So maybe if you ask, did you call the police? They might just say no and leave it at that. When the police actually showed up, but if you ask, were the police called, they might reveal, yes, the police were called, and this is why I really was not okay with it. And right there that moving forward with your safety plan, police will maybe a last, last option, maybe make it a last option, but maybe it's not an option at all. Maybe they're not about the police. So you have to listen to that and respect that and factor in that, all right, law enforcement is not going to be a part of this, part of this safety plan. So these interviewing questions, how you ask it can really make a difference in what you're actually being shared. Because a survivor, they don't owe you anything. They don't owe you all their information. They don't owe you your life story. You're hoping to get as much of it as you can, but that's ultimately up to them. So you want to work with what they're able to provide you, and the more trauma-informed the approach, hopefully the more information you'll get to work with. So you want to watch for minimizing answers. Did you feel pain? Not much. Could you breathe? Sort of. The goal is not to explicitly challenge this minimization, but to use it as guideposts in getting to the truth of the matter for the purpose of doing the best you can to help. So, and that minimization is also very normal. When the relationship is likely a survival tactic that can't simply be shut off because you're presenting yourself as a safe person. So again, it's kind of goalposts as you go to help you figure out, what the situation actually is like, what it's looking like, basically kind of reading between the lines, I guess is a way to put it. Because if you're not trained to read those minimizing issues of something, you can continue going, okay, I guess that's not the case, and you can scratch that off as a possible concern, when the survivor might really be trying to convey yes, but they either are unable to, unafraid, don't trust you enough to share it. So it's just something to be aware of, those kind of subtle language tricks. So what is a safety plan? We've been talking about it, but I guess we can, it never hurts to throw up a formal definition. So a safety plan is a personalized, practical plan that includes ways for a survivor to remain safe and keep their children safe, assuming they have them, while in a violent relationship, when planning to leave or after they've left. A complete safety plan will have all of the vital information and necessary steps they need and will be tailored to their unique situations. So I found that the best safety plans have a minimum of 3 steps to them. Though it can be a combination of direct action steps, taking pictures of injuries sustained, and resources like contacting a shelter. So it definitely can be a combination of both. And 3 is just the minimum. If someone has if someone's in a place where they can talk it out, and you can figure out a 20-point safety plan that starts with them in the relationship and ends with them, elsewhere and safe. Awesome. That's great. All the more power to you and that survivor. You just have to recognize, where they're at and not overwhelm them and not push it. So going into more detail, so the goal of a safety plan, is going to be what the survivor wants for themselves and their children. So your job is to hear the survivor, understand the situation the best you can, and follow their lead while helping problem solve. And understanding the situation can potentially force you to keep your own morals or value systems, in check and kind of at the door. The example that I always tend to use is early on in my career. I did a safety plan with a woman, and we were talking about how to anticipate when her abuser might become violent and how to avoid the fight when that happens. So we got to that part of the safety plan, and I brought up that question of, how do you foresee it happening? Can you anticipate it? And what's the best way to handle it if you do feel like things have turned violent? And she had the answer right there. She said that basically her solution was, if she saw that happening, she would engage in sexual relations with her abuser. It would change the abuser's mood, and afterwards he would be, he'd go to bed, ignore her, and she would remain safe. And that was part of her safety plan. Now, do I, Nathan, feel comfortable personally with the idea of someone having, sex with someone to avoid violence and for that reason only? Of course not. Not at all. But this is her reality, her choice, her options available, and odds are she didn't need me to challenge it for conflicted feelings to arise. So by meeting her where she was at without judgment, we were able to continue working on the safety plan, which of course ultimately was working towards the goal of her leaving, so she didn't even have to, ever engage in such a survival tactic again. But that's what she, wanted. That's what she chose for herself in that moment. And, again, it's her safety plan. It's a survivor safety plan. We want it to be tailored to the best options possible at a point in time while remaining flexible to change. We know statistically that leaving a violent relationship is the most dangerous time for the survivor. It represents an absolute loss of control for the batterer, who can, crave that power and control above all else. If I can't have you, no one can, is a common threat of mentality of batterers. So you really have to anticipate the capacity for drastic and violent changes to their demeanor, how they're going about their day, and what they're capable of. And for that reason, you need to rely on the expert of this batterer, the survivor, to anticipate what safety planning steps are feasible, while stressing that they consider backup plans. Think of example, he's supposed to be at work this day when you're planning on leaving. What if he calls out sick? Kind of looking at all those alternatives, all those what ifs. You obviously can't cover every single what if, but by even covering one or two, you're already making the safety plan a lot more flexible and loose, which is good because you never know when things are going to change. You want it as personalized as the survivor is comfortable allowing it to be. So you want to follow the survivor's lead and pay attention to their interest and enthusiasm for the exercise. And remember that, despite all of your good intentions, power differentials are going to exist. Simply because the survivor is reaching out for help, knowing that you're the source and potentially the gatekeeper for those available resources and options. And that's especially true if you're working at a hotline that's based out of a shelter. So a common mistake that I feel for beginning staff that have just learned about safety planning, is that someone tells their initial story and then the advocate just gets real excited and goes, I know exactly what we can do for you. And they go, da-da-da-da-da-da, and they go on and on and on, and they come up with this epic safety plan, and they're so excited because they have the tools and knowledge to help and offer a safety plan, and they're probably not reasoning because of that enthusiasm. The survivor is just kind of nodding along going, okay, get off the phone. Advocate feels great. Wow, I just helped someone, gave them all this information. The survivor's off the phone, looking at those epic lists, assuming they even wrote it down, going, I don't want to do any of this, so they're no better off. And they probably don't view that hotline, that resource as an option anymore because, they're going to think, I'm just going to call them up and be told what to do. So you want to make sure that you have buy-in. And if they're interested, and there's time to really talk out the safety plan, personalizing the safety plan can make a world of difference in its effectiveness and the comfort of the survivor enacting it. So let's look at these two safety plans. One safety plan is just boilerplate, things to do if you're in a violent, relationship to stay safe. And the other is taking those, boilerplate safety plans and personalizing it. So, it's the difference between telling a survivor, You know, establish a code word, you know, so someone you trust knows when to call for help. Avoid rooms you can get trapped in, like bathrooms, or one that have weapons, like a kitchen. I mean, not bad information, but it's just so impersonal, and it's broad and even can be a little bit vague to someone, especially if, again, they're not familiar with this field. Whereas, you know, safety plan B, it's taking the fundamentals of that first safety plan, but you're personalizing it. You know, you're bringing in actual people in that person's life, and you know, and you're bringing in the actual batter, and you're talking about, you know, where you know, exactly where you go and what excuse you use to get there. You know, it's looser, and especially, you know, keeping in mind that, you know, however used to abuse a survivor is, you know, that trauma's still there, and you can't assume that they're going to be retaining everything perfectly, you know, even though it's their own situation. So for that reason, the more personalized you can make it, the more intuitive you can make it, the greater the chance that they're going to remember to follow it when so much other things is going on. So a safety plan should also include strategies for staying in the relationship, just as much as it is for leaving the relationship. You know, for a survivor, you know, finding a way to temporarily stay in the situation longer might be the safest step for them. And that can especially be true of the survivor as a mother and their concerns about stability for their children. So the goal is certainly to work towards, you know, the eventuality of leaving, but you can't rush someone in their situation. So this preliminary work needs to come first, if that's what they're wanting. If they don't want to talk at all about leaving, you know, you can feel it out, but focus on what they want. That being said, if a survivor wants that immediately, you know, that's where you start. You know, again, the experts of their situation. And as well, and finally, the safety plan, you know, we want to be sensitive to the enormity of the situation. You know, for you as an advocate, creating a safety plan for a survivor in crisis might literally be in your job description and not even the only one you're doing that day. And for your confidence sake, there's nothing wrong with treating it like another professional task. You know, but the leap of faith a survivor is taking and trusting a safety plan devised with an advocate is a monumental one, and shouldn't ever be conveyed to them as just another day in the office for you. You know, so you really want to make sure that, you know, you obviously want to convey that you know what you're doing, but they don't want to feel like another number. You know, they want to feel like you are helping them because you're invested, which again, hopefully, you know, you are. So it's just a matter of conveying what you're already feeling. So rather than covering every single suggested safety planning step in detail, I'm going to speak more generally about the different stages of safety planning and what you should be keeping in mind when covering with a survivor. That being said, please speak up if you'd like to talk about any steps more in detail. I'm also happy to email any of you this whole safety planning guide we're about to get into if you want a copy. And finally, I believe a copy of this webinar will also be going up on the Coalition's YouTube channel later this week. So even though we're not covering everything, all this information can certainly be available for reference later on. So safety planning while in the relationship. When helping someone safety plan while in the relationship, the #1 focus should be on reducing potential harm. You know, it's helping them process out loud what they know about their abuser, what sets off fights, what helps avoid them, who, if anyone, they can trust to confide it, you know, the details of the abuse with. Is at this stage that the empathetic curiosity really matters. You know, you want to affirm that this behavior is inappropriate, that no one deserves to live in fear or feel undeserving of love, while not making them feel guilty or wrong for being in the situation in the first place. You know, normalize the prevalence of domestic violence. Normalize how seductive the cycle of violence can be. Normalize and affirm for them that it's not as simple as just walking away. You know, hopefully this will encourage them to think more concretely about leaving. But, you know, but general encouragement aside, that is their decision and their decision alone to make. And in the meantime, you know, you're helping them stay safer. Now, safety planning with kids can be particularly tricky. Does anyone have any ideas why? Why safety planning around kids can be tricky? All right. Well, they're no takers, but I'll just keep going. And certainly, as I'm talking, you're welcome to jump in if you're still working on your response to why it's tricky. Why it's tricky. Yes. Yes. So thank you. So yes. So kids, they certainly are in danger of being manipulated. You know. So it's not as simple as you know, working with a survivor who understands the situation. It can be hard for them to understand, yes. And you know, and they very well might share things with other, you know, with the abuser potentially. So you have to be aware of that. Yes, all these things are very true. I would say the other main reason why it's difficult to safety plan around children, and I feel this is the initial obstacle that comes before, you know, being difficult to understand, is that, you know, mom, assuming that there's a relationship, the survivor, you know, is the mom. Mom is probably doing everything she can to shield her children from this violence. You know, I mean, that's makes sense. You know, that those are maternal instincts. You know, and for them often, you know, it's their children that matter more than their own survival. You know, as someone just said, they're trying to, you know, they want to protect the children, and that can mean that in their mind, they've shielded, you know, the children from this violence. And they may have taken incredible steps to shield the children from violence. So you never want to minimize the efforts they're making. We just know, you know, from all of our research in this field and just from understanding children, that children pick up on things, you know, even the most subtle things. So odds are the children are aware that at least something is wrong. And, you know, and the conversation with mom can kind of be about that. Now, I'm not saying that you might be able to convince, you might not necessarily convince them in that initial conversation. It might just be planting the seeds. But, you know, it's important to talk with them about the fact that kids are hyper aware, kids are sensitive, and that as well, we know that breaking that silence is so important for getting out of abuse and keeping abuse out of lives. So kind of encouraging mom and helping mom find the right words to convey enough to the children to allow them to stay safe. You know, you don't have to get into everything, but just reminding them the kids are probably aware of something, and providing some context, obviously age appropriate, actually might be better than saying nothing, because if you're saying nothing, they're aware something's going on, but there's no other context, or maybe the context they're getting is just from the abuser, which, you know, as someone mentioned before, can be manipulative. So by providing them some context for what they're probably already feeling, you know, you're going to make them feel safer, and then hopefully as well, you know, the mom will be able to incorporate children into the safety plan. So planning to leave is where encouraging the survivor to lean on their knowledge of their abuser is most effective. You know, what are the abuser's habits? What is he aware of, not aware of? Is there anyone in their life they trust that their abuser is used to seeing around who wouldn't raise suspicion? You know, can they help? What resources can the survivor realistically leave with? When is the best time to do that? You know, the best safety plan is going to avoid direct confrontation and the potential for violence. You know, ideally the survivor will be gone and safe before the abuser, you know, even realize anything has happened. If leaving the relationship is going to involve any legal matters, you know, gathering photographic evidence or, you know, keeping track of incidents in a journal, if it can be done safely, can make a big difference in court. And that brings us to the go bag, which all of these things can go into. So with a go bag, like so many aspects of a safety plan, it comes down to the individual situation. You know, what do they define as necessities? To what degree are they having to start over? What is of sentimental value to them? How discreetly must they collect the items, assuming they have access at all? How intertwined is their life with their abusers? You know, a go bag can be a backpack hidden at a next door neighbor's house for months until the right time, or it can be a window of opportunity where the survivor throws everything they own into the back of a car, hit the gas, sort through it later. Now, if there isn't time, there isn't time. I've seen so many instances before where a survivor arrives at shelter with nothing but the clothes on their back. Find a way forward, you know, rebuild. You know, you can replace most things. You can't replace people. So, well, we definitely want to stress the go bag just because we want to make things as easy as possible for a survivor when they've left. We don't want to emphasize future steps over immediate physical safety. Orders of protection can be very, useful, when leaving. But it, again, all depends upon the situation and upon the, especially upon the batterer. Orders of protections are great if the batterer is law abiding. If the fear of arrest or legal involvement is gonna keep the batterer in line, great. Order protection might be exactly what you need to show, for the survivor to show, I am serious, stay away, will be consequences. If their batterer already has a rap sheet, breaks the law every day, doesn't care, that order protection might not do anything but anger him more, have him think that she's taking away even more of the control, or he, sorry, I don't mean to gender stereotype, and make things worse. So you want to make sure that it's something that would actually be respected by the batterer. And again, the survivor is going to want to know that. Most often the survivor is going to know right off the bat, if their abuser is law-abiding and if order protection makes sense. But if they are law-abiding, it can do a lot. It can prohibit communication, and stalking. It can award sole custody of children and pets. It can award sole possession of the residency and force the abuser to leave, which is incredible. It can do a whole lot of things. Again, just making sure that it's going to be actually respected and paid attention to by the batterer rather than just enraging them further. And if they want to go down that road, for those that work on order protections, it's a process. All that paperwork and the process of navigating the courts can be overwhelming even if you're not dealing with trauma. So certainly if that's something they want to pursue, make sure, again, there's that warm handoff. They know that they're talking with someone that can help them with the forms, help them with steps, help them understand, what goes into it. When do you file it and when's the court date, and making sure they have a way to get to the court date, because it is a process, and you want to make sure they are aware of the process before they get into it. Safety planning with the offender leaving the home. So a lot of reasons why the offender leaving the home is a better case scenario for a survivor. For many, the other option is homelessness. It's a chance to keep sense of stability, even with so much changing, which we know is especially valuable for children. As many of us know, changing schools can be an ordeal regardless of what else is going on. But it removes from the safety plan most elements of confidentiality, which, depending on the nature of the batterer, can be significant. And again, talk this out with the survivor. If they say their abuser is terrified of breaking the law and order protection's in place and has been sent packing, awesome. It's basic preliminary steps like changing the lock, being mindful of your surroundings, considering some new routines to reduce risk even further. If it's the opposite situation, safety planning, at home might be a temporary measure until new residents can be secured with multiple backup plans and numerous people tuned into the situation. Hold on, I'm checking on a question here. How can we empower survivors after their order protection is denied? Yeah, that's a good question. I think that you need, to an extent, I would encourage you as an advocate to figure out exactly why it was denied, and make sure that there's no chance for appeal. If you already have so much going on, if you are not familiar with the legal system, a denial until something is added might just read as a denial. So it helps an advocate to really figure out exactly why it was denied, and make sure there isn't any way of appealing that. If there's no way to appeal it, then unfortunately you kind of have to, again, keep the safety plan flexible. You're going to have to figure out, kind of a new approach, a new strategy. That's no doubt upsetting. You're allowed to affirm that it's upsetting, but you just got to work with what you got. So even if a survivor has no worries, about the offender coming back, bothering them at all, they're in the house, they're good, I would still talk out with them their comfort in calling the police in case it should suddenly change. And again, it's not our job to change a preconceived notion of the police, but if they're open, 911 is going to be one of the quickest options at disposal, if they're at this home and their abuser shows up and is making the situation scary or unsafe. So survivor leaving home, when it's a survivor leaving, the obvious first step is where they're relocating to. If the initial answer is, I have no idea, that might be where domestic violence shelter comes into play. They can be so crucial as a resource. So it's always good to first assess if the survivor has any friends or family they can safely stay with, on at least a temporary basis. And this is not to discredit DV shelters or knock them at all. I worked in one for 6 years, and I'll always vouch for the role. But for all they're good, there can be so much going on in a shelter besides this one survivor's efforts. They're likely roommates, navigating communal spaces, navigating other survivors' trauma issue to your own. It's a lot of noise to compete with, which might make it harder, for someone to rebuild their lives. Now, again, if that's their option, if that's, their only option that's safe, I mean, they might just have to work through that. But regardless of whether or not there are alternative plans, it's important to prepare a survivor for the realities of shelter living. You don't want them to take all of the risk of leaving only to find it's not a sustainable option for them for whatever reason, they determine as is their right. And beyond that, not to minimize the first step in the slightest, the safety planning should revolve around maintaining as much privacy as can be found, and determining what a sense of safety feels like. Unfortunately, many survivors find they, have to leave their town or state entirely to break free. If the batterer is that, insistent on finding them, no matter where they go in the area. And in those instances, I would lean heavily on the National DV hotline, to help figure out what resources are around the country, as well as helping them determine if they have trusted family or friends elsewhere. Not to imply that they'll automatically be staying with them, but familiar emotional support in a new place, is invaluable. I think we can all agree is important, no matter what the reason is for moving. Financial safety planning. So financial safety planning with domestic violence is kind of a combination of two things. It's a combination of helping them figure out how to possibly earn and keep hidden from their abuser income while they're in the relationship, and then combined with financial literacy assistance for after they've left and they're getting back on their feet. So while in the relationship, again, it all comes down to the situation, how controlling the batterer is, and what they feel they can do safely. The example that I heard a year ago that I just love so much is the story of the survivor who her plan was, she was tasked by her batterer as always being the one to do the groceries. And for over a year, whenever she went to the grocery store, whatever last minuscule change she had after she got her groceries, she would take and she would hide in a tampon applicator in a tampon box in the bathroom. And that's how she saved money that her batterer was unaware of. Unaware was going missing, and unaware was still in the house. And after I think close to a year, she had enough money saved up this way to make the process of leaving, substantially easier. So again, survivors are, ingenious in their situation. They know what works and doesn't. So often it's a matter of just helping them be creative and finding the right way to both make and save money. I will also shamelessly promote the Purple Purse, which is a curriculum and grant provided by the Allstate Foundation. Their goal is basically to provide financial literacy to survivors of DV, as well as helping them see the warning signs of financial abuse, because we know that is so prevalent in domestic violence relationships. So if you want to check out their website, they have extensive curriculums for both advocates and survivors directly with financial literacy. It's a great resource. They go super in depth, everything you might need to know about balancing a checkbook and debt and bankruptcy. And that resource is free. And I definitely would encourage you, to have that in mind, working once the survivor gets to a place where they are not in immediate crisis, that can be a really valuable skill to work with them on, to help ensure that they never have to return to their batterer or enter a new abusive relationship simply because they cannot afford to otherwise. Pets. We all love pets, right? And of course, why, how come pets are part of the family? For those that truly love their pets, pets are part of the family. And for many, they're not going to leave unless their pet's coming with them, which as a dog owner, I completely empathize with, I completely get. So it's always good in safety planning to ask about pets. If they truly are, if their pet is truly their family member, they're probably going to bring the pets up. But it's always good to check and figuring out how to keep that pet safe, while making sure the survivor is getting out of the pace when you get out. So if at all possible, we want to make sure that the pets are not left alone with an abusive partner. We know, unfortunately, pets are often, a victim of the power and control cycle and are used as leverage, threats against pets. So, it's talking to the survivor about who else can potentially take care of the pet, even temporarily. If you have to leave the pet behind, with your partner, think about other ways that you can have people come and check in. If you're taking the pet, do what you can to get the ownership papers, proof of ownership to make sure that that isn't contested. As well, when you're leaving, make sure that you, if you've left, in terms of covering your tracks and making sure that your abuser is not going to know where to find you, you might want to look at finding a different veterinarian, or avoid leaving your dog outside if the batterer is going to drive to the neighborhood looking for this one dog outside. Lastly, I would like to plug Red Rover, which is a wonderful organization that, they do their best to help offset the cost of temporary pet boarding while clients of domestic violence shelter. So they are a great resource if you are working with a survivor that needs to go somewhere where pets aren't allowed, but obviously is invested in what's going on with their pets. Red Rover can potentially help with kind of financial assistance to offset that, which is great. Technology safety planning. This could be its own webinar. This could be its own conference. Technology is obviously very, it's a broad subject. It's a subject you can really dive into. We do know, unfortunately, that batterers overall have a leg up on police in terms of technology. Everything, law enforcement's efforts to combat and just moves at a slower bureaucratic pace, whereas batterers, they have credit cards, the internet, and the will to learn and buy gadgets. So we know that, if a survivor identifies their batterer as technologically savvy, really take that into account. And it's a matter of having conversations about which of your devices, do you trust? Which ones do only you have access to? Do you have shared passwords? Can you change that shared password without raising suspicion? Is there any chance that there's spyware on the computer or a keylogger plugged into the computer that's going to track all of your efforts on it? If they have any doubt about that, definitely the encouragement is for them to go to, a public computer, or use a computer that, they trust of a family member or friend, as well as, making sure that you're keeping any files, on maybe USB drive and hidden. Some of this is obvious, but obviously, as you get into more of the nuts and bolts of technology, it can get more tricky. And you don't want to discount, your phones. These days, phones are essentially computers, so we want to make sure that your location services are off. Can you trust your vehicle, making sure that no one is tracking you? If you are if you're working in a shelter and you're working with someone if you're working with a survivor, bringing them into your shelter, and your shelter is a confidential location, I would strongly encourage you, if you don't already have this, to set it up where the survivor checks in with you a little ways away from the shelter to make sure that they are confident they were not followed, and they were not tracked before ultimately giving them the final steps into shelter, to preserve that confidentiality. And lastly, safety planning around emotional health. And this one can absolutely be forgotten or discounted by both the advocate and the survivor in the moment, because some of these other safety planning steps are just so, they're just so crisis heavy, and they involve such, literal actions and literal consequences that we can forget about emotional health, and how there absolutely can be, self-care strategies around emotional health. And that is especially important once a survivor is through, the initial scary process, overwhelming process of figuring out how to leave and leaving. Because we know, domestic violence relationships, they're so tricky to get out of because it's not black and white. That abuser is also the person that probably took the survivor on a really great date. They might not forget, and starting over, can be very lonely, and it can be on those lonely nights when the dust is beginning to settle, and the body has time to process depression and grief and trauma, that it can be very difficult to be alone, because there is, likely an inherent loneliness to starting over. There's loneliness of starting over after any relationship, especially if a relationship has, defined, so much of your life for so long. So for that reason, it's good to talk out with them. What are you going to do if you are feeling down? How do you take care of yourself? Let's move away from the life-saving stuff to just what do you do when you're down? Who are your support? And that can also be a time to, bring in your professional knowledge of here's support groups, here's counseling, here's a 24/7 or 27/7 is right here, 24/7, crisis line. Recognize that they're going to need, just someone to talk to, and they might need that help after the fact. Preparing them for that is really important. And again, make sure that's not getting lost in all of the, the more direct, action star moves. So those are the basics of safety planning, certainly as I see them. Before opening the webinar up to any final questions anyone might have, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone. And, thank you listening for all you do to assist survivors. Whatever the capacity, it matters. It absolutely saves lives. And I'm honored to share this work with you. So thank you all so much. I do see, it looks like we possibly have another question. So let's see what that is here. What do you say? All right, what do you say when they ask why they want to go back? Hey, Kristen, can you be a little more specific with that question? What do you say when they ask you why they, are you asking what do you do when they say they want to go back? Well, I'll answer it. I don't know what I'm not totally seeing this question. I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one further. I will say this. This might not be exactly what you're asking. If so, I apologize. We can keep at it. But I will say that if a survivor is telling you that they want to go back, that is their right, their decision. It is certainly important to figure out the crux of why they're wanting to go back. If they're saying I want to go back because I have no other options, it's absolutely time to talk out options and make sure that's the case. If they want to go back because they feel it is best for them, on an emotional level and on just a life level, you don't want to make them feel like they're burning a bridge for help. You don't want to challenge that. You just want to do what you can to give them, the safety planning necessary to, stay safe in the relationship should it turn violent again. As well as encourage them to reach back out at any point if they want for, further assistance. Okay, well, unless there are any other questions, we're gonna be ending this webinar. Thank you all again so much for attending. Like I said, I am happy to send out a document with all the safety planning steps and the copy, as well as the PowerPoint slides if you'd like them. Those should all be up on the YouTube's Coalition page shortly. So thank you all so much for everything, and I hope you all have a wonderful day and stay warm. So thank you.